Security didn't know who the boy was. They just knew he wasn't on the list. He stood at the gate of the Warner Brothers lot on a Tuesday morning in 1971, 8 years old, blonde hair, blue eyes, holding a brown paper bag with his lunch inside. The guard checked his clipboard twice. No name, no clearance, no entry. The kid didn't argue. He just stood there, quiet, waiting. He'd been told to wait at the gate. His father would handle it. 100 yards away, on stage 12, Steve McQueen was setting up a shot for Le Mans, the most expensive racing film ever made, the most personal project of his career, and the most troubled production in Hollywood. The studio was hemorrhaging money. The director had been fired. McQueen had taken over, and now he was producing, starring, and trying to salvage a film that everyone said was doomed. But none of that mattered when he saw the security guard put his hand up to stop his son from entering. McQueen walked off set without saying a word. Didn't tell the crew, didn't ask permission. Just walked, boots on pavement, eyes locked on the gate. When he got there, he didn't raise his voice, didn't threaten, didn't explain. He just looked at the guard and said 4 words. "That's my son." The gate opened. The boy walked through. And Hollywood learned something that morning. You could control Steve McQueen's career, his contracts, his scripts, but you couldn't control his blood. To understand why that moment mattered, you need to understand what Hollywood sets were in 1971. They weren't workplaces. They were kingdoms, controlled, hierarchical, absolute. Who got in, who stayed out, who had access. These weren't suggestions. They were laws. Studio executives controlled the lists. Union rules controlled the positions. Insurance policies controlled the liability. Even stars, especially stars, had families kept off set. Too much distraction, too much risk, too much humanity. The logic was simple. Sets are for work. Families are for home. Never mix them. It wasn't personal. It was system. A system designed to keep everyone in their place. Actors acted. Directors directed. Families stayed in Beverly Hills and waited for Daddy to come home. Steve McQueen hated that system, not just because it was cold, though it was, but because it reminded him of every institution that had tried to control him as a kid. The relatives who passed him around like luggage. The reform school that locked him in cells. The Marines that tried to break his will. All of them had the same message. You don't get to decide. We decide for you. And McQueen had spent his entire life proving them wrong. By 1971, he was the highest-paid actor in the world. He picked his projects. He fired directors. He rewrote contracts. He controlled his image down to the smallest detail. But there was one thing Hollywood couldn't give him. One thing he'd never had as a child. Stability. Safety. The ability to tell his son, "I'm here. You're not alone." Because Steve McQueen grew up alone. Completely alone. Born in 1930 to a teenage mother who didn't want him and a father who vanished before Steve could walk, McQueen spent his first 12 years being abandoned over and over. His mother, Julianne, was an alcoholic. She'd disappear for weeks, leaving Steve with relatives who resented having to feed him. He slept on couches, ate table scraps, learned early that love was conditional, and family was a lie people told themselves. By 9, he was on the streets. By 12, he was in reform school, being beaten by staff who called it discipline. He learned something there that never left him. No one protects you. You protect yourself. So when Steve McQueen became a father in 1960, when his son Chad was born, he made a promise, a silent one, the kind you don't say out loud, because saying it makes it real and breakable. The promise was this: you will never wonder where I am. You will never feel abandoned. You will never be alone. But Hollywood didn't care about promises. Hollywood cared about schedules, budgets, insurance. And in 1971, on the set of Le Mans, Steve McQueen's promise collided with Hollywood's rules. The production of Le Mans was chaos. McQueen had dreamed of making this film for years. A pure racing film, minimal dialogue, just speed and sound, and the feeling of pushing a machine to its limit. But the studio didn't understand his vision. They wanted a love story, a plot, stars. McQueen wanted documentary realism. The tension escalated until McQueen took control, firing the original director and essentially directing it himself while still playing the lead. The crew was exhausted. The budget was ballooning. The executives back in Los Angeles were panicking. And McQueen, he was living on set, sleeping in his trailer, eating cold sandwiches between takes, obsessing over every detail. He was so deep in the film that he'd started forgetting there was a world outside it. That's when his wife, Neil, called. "Steve, Chad wants to see you. He misses you." McQueen felt it in his chest. Guilt. The kind that reminds you what you're sacrificing while you chase perfection. "Oh, I'll be home this weekend," he said. Neil's voice went quiet. "He doesn't want you this weekend, Steve. He wants you now, today. He wants to see where you are, what you're doing. He wants to be with his dad." McQueen didn't hesitate. "Bring him tomorrow. I'll tell security." But here's what McQueen didn't understand, or maybe didn't care about. Studio lots in 1971 didn't just let people in, especially not kids. Insurance didn't cover non-employees, union rules restricted access. And Warner Brothers, already bleeding money on Le Mans, wasn't about to add liability by letting a child wander around a set with racing cars, cameras, and chaos. So when McQueen told the production manager, "My son's coming to set tomorrow," the production manager said what he was trained to say, "Steve, that's not possible. We can't have non-crew on set. Insurance won't allow it." McQueen stared at him, didn't blink. "My son will be here tomorrow morning. Make sure security knows." The production manager nodded, but he didn't make the call because he knew the system. And the system said no. Chad McQueen arrived at Warner Brothers at 8:47 a.m. His mother dropped him off at the main gate with instructions. "Wait here. Your dad will come get you." Chad stood there with his lunch bag, excited, nervous. He'd never been to a film set before, never seen his dad work. This felt important, like being let into a secret. The security guard, a man named Bill, 50-something, ex-military, checked his list. No Chad McQueen, no clearance for minors, no exceptions. He looked at the kid. The kid looked back. "I'm here to see my dad," Chad said. Bill's face softened for a second. Then he remembered the rules. "What's your dad's name, son?" "Steve McQueen." Bill's expression didn't change. He'd worked studio security for 12 years. He'd heard it all. Kids claiming to be related to stars. Fans lying to get past the gate. Scammers, stalkers, dreamers. The rule was simple. If you're not on the list, you don't get in. It didn't matter who you claimed to be. "I'm sorry, kid. I can't let you through without clearance." Chad didn't argue. He'd been raised not to. His father had taught him, you don't fight people doing their job. You wait. You stay calm. You trust that someone who matters will fix it. So Chad stepped back from the gate and sat on the curb, waiting. Inside stage 12, Steve McQueen was blocking a scene. The crew was setting up lights. The cinematographer was explaining a tracking shot. And McQueen's assistant, a young guy named Tommy, came running over. "Steve, there's a situation at the gate." McQueen turned. "What situation?" "Security won't let your son in. Says he's not on the list." The set went quiet. Not because anyone yelled, because of the way McQueen's face changed. It wasn't anger. Anger is loud, explosive. This was something colder, harder. The look McQueen got when someone crossed a line they didn't even know existed. He didn't say anything to the crew, just turned and walked. The assistant director called after him. "Steve, we need to stay on schedule." McQueen didn't turn around. He just kept walking, boots on concrete, jaw set, eyes forward. The walk from stage 12 to the main gate was about 200 yards. McQueen covered it in silence. He could see Chad from 50 feet away, sitting on the curb, lunch bag beside him, looking small. Too small. And McQueen felt something he hadn't felt in years. The memory of being that kid. The one nobody wanted. The one who waited at gates and doors and thresholds, hoping someone would let him in. But this was different. This time, McQueen was the one with power. And he was going to use it. He reached the gate. The security guard saw him coming and straightened up. "Mr. McQueen, I'm sorry, but..." McQueen held up one hand. The guard stopped talking. McQueen didn't look at him. He looked at his son. Chad stood up, uncertain. And Steve McQueen said, in a voice so quiet the guard had to lean in to hear it, "That's my son." 4 words. That's all. No explanation. No argument. No appeal to policy or procedure. Just a statement of fact. That's my son. The guard hesitated. He had rules. He had protocols. He had a job to do. But he also had eyes. And he could see what was happening. This wasn't a negotiation. This wasn't a request. This was Steve McQueen drawing a line. And on one side of that line was the studio, the system, the rules. On the other side was his son. The guard stepped aside. "Open the gate." Chad walked through. Steve put his hand on his son's shoulder, just for a second, just a touch, and they walked back to set together. The guard watched them go. He didn't call anyone, didn't file a report, because he understood something Hollywood executives never did. Some men you can control with contracts. Steve McQueen wasn't one of them. Back on stage 12, the crew pretended not to notice, but they noticed. Everyone noticed. Chad McQueen, 8 years old, sitting in a director's chair with his name on it, a chair the prop guys had made in 15 minutes. Eating his lunch, watching his dad work. And Steve McQueen, between takes, checking over his shoulder to make sure the kid was still there. Still safe. Still seen. The production manager approached McQueen during a lighting setup. "Steve, we need to talk about." McQueen cut him off. "He stays." The production manager opened his mouth to argue about insurance, about liability, about protocol. Then he saw McQueen's face. And he walked away, because some arguments aren't worth having. Chad stayed on set for 6 hours that day. He didn't cause problems, didn't touch equipment, didn't ask questions. He just watched. And at the end of the day, when McQueen wrapped his final shot, he walked over to his son and said, "You ready to go home?" Chad nodded. And as they left the lot together, Chad asked, "Dad, can I come back tomorrow?" McQueen looked at his son, thought about the gate, the guard, the system that tried to keep them apart. And he said, "Yeah, you can come back whenever you want." He didn't ask the studio, didn't clear it with production, just decided. Because Steve McQueen understood something Hollywood never did. You can threaten a man's career, his money, his fame, but you can't threaten his family and expect him to back down. Word got around, not publicly. Studios didn't advertise when stars broke the rules. But privately, in offices and meetings, people talked. "Did you hear? McQueen brought his kid to set. Security tried to stop him. McQueen didn't even argue. Just walked him right through." The studio executives were furious. Not because of the rule breaking. Hollywood was built on stars breaking rules. But because McQueen didn't ask permission. Didn't negotiate. Didn't play the game. He just decided his son was more important than their system, and there wasn't a damn thing they could do about it. One executive said in a closed-door meeting, "We need to remind McQueen who's in charge here." Another, older, wiser, replied, "You can remind him all you want. But he's not going to listen. Because Steve McQueen doesn't work for us. We work for him. And the second we forget that, he'll walk. And we lose the most bankable star in the world." They never brought it up with McQueen, never confronted him, never changed the policy. They just let it go. Because challenging Steve McQueen on something that mattered to him wasn't a fight you could win. You could beat him on money. on schedule, on script. But on family? On his son? That was sacred ground. And Hollywood, for all its power, understood when to retreat. Years later, in the 1990s, Chad McQueen, now an adult, an actor himself, did an interview about his father. The interviewer asked about his memories of childhood. Chad paused, thought, and said, "My dad wasn't perfect. He was difficult, obsessive, sometimes distant. But he had this rule. When I needed him, he was there. Didn't matter what he was doing, didn't matter who it pissed off. He'd stop everything and be there." "Was there a specific moment you remember?" Chad smiled. "Yeah, I was 8. He was shooting Le Mans. I wanted to see him work. And the studio said no. My dad heard about it, walked off set, and came to get me himself. Didn't argue with anyone. Just said, 'That's my son.' And that was it. I got to spend the day with him, watching him work, feeling like I mattered more than the movie." The interviewer asked, "Did he do that a lot?" "Every time I asked." This story isn't about breaking rules. It's about knowing which rules matter. Hollywood had a system, a hierarchy, a way of doing things that kept stars in their place and families out of the way. Steve McQueen understood that system better than anyone. He'd fought it his whole career. But on that day in 1971, he didn't fight it. He ignored it. Because some things are bigger than systems. Some relationships can't be negotiated. Some promises are non-negotiable. Steve McQueen had been abandoned as a child. He'd spent years wondering why nobody chose him, why nobody fought for him. And when he became a father, he made a choice. His son would never wonder, would never wait at gates and hope someone let him in, would never feel like an inconvenience. That's the power the photograph represents, not the one that exists, but the one in our minds. Steve McQueen walking through that gate with his hand on his son's shoulder, not asking permission, not apologizing, just existing as both the biggest star in the world and a father who refused to let anything, not studios, not security, not the system, separate him from his child. Hollywood forgave stars who shouted, who threw tantrums, who made demands about trailers and billing and money. They tolerated ego. But they never quite forgave Steve McQueen for this. Because this wasn't ego. This was priority. This was a man saying, "You can have my time, my talent, my image, but you can't have my family. They're mine, and I don't need your permission to protect them." This story reminds us that real power isn't loud. It isn't about winning arguments or breaking rules dramatically. It's about knowing what you won't compromise on and being willing to walk away from everything else to protect it. Steve McQueen didn't break Hollywood's rules that day. He reminded them why rules exist in the first place, to protect what matters. And when what matters is your child, no system in the world is strong enough to stand in the way. If you want more untold stories about the legends who chose blood over business and never apologized, subscribe. Because the most powerful moments aren't the ones they filmed. They're the ones they tried to forget.